Good morning. You notice the mics worked all day so far? Just saying. We need to be thankful for these moments when they happen. Glad each person can be here. If you're visiting with us, we are very happy. Some are visiting, but were here a long time ago. We're thankful you're back. Some may be visiting for the first time, and we want to get to know you, so please don't rush out. For those who are here for the announcements, I appreciate Russell mentioning the background checks for teachers, but if you weren't aware before, you are now. He was a principal, and that definitely came out in the announcements, so thank you. And Tony, for those communion thoughts, we'll talk a little bit about what you shared today, and for Lynn and Ethan and Jamin and everybody who serves, thank you for the work you do. I want to begin by asking a couple of questions. These, you can respond if you want, but it's more to think about. Do you think we live in a world and in a culture where peace reigns? Okay, you answered that. Do you think peacemaking is a common trait found in most people? Most of us are going to answer no to both those questions, right? And if we believe the answer is no, if we believe peace is not a common trait at least, it's a trait we see in some, but not a common trait in most people, and definitely not a common practice or a common characteristic in our culture, what is? I'm going to suggest something, I've mentioned it before. I would suggest that our culture is less interested in peace and more interested in winning. We live in a culture that focuses way too much on winning, on saying, here's my side, here's their side, I must defeat them. We recognize here are the good guys and here are the bad guys, right? I mean, if you've watched any movie or read any book ever, here are the good guys, here are the bad guys, right? So it's all about destroying our enemies. That's the culture we live in. Winning creates sides. Winning is about eliminating others. You know what there is no room for in a culture that's about winning? Peacemaking. There is no peace when there's us versus them. There just can't be. In fact, if you watch sports today and you see somebody try to be kind to someone on the opposing team, they get attacked by their own teammates, even by people on the other team. Like, what are you doing? Because we have within ourselves this idea that there is some places there is no common ground. There is no room for peace. But we know God has called us as followers of His to something different, right? Right? We said no to the other one. We can say yes to this one, right? All right. We are called to live differently than the society that promotes this winning idea. You read it right here. In Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, He says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called" what? Children of God. If we are children of God, we cannot buy into the winning mindset of our culture. We need to be people who seek to bring or make peace around us. But what in the world does that mean? What is peacemaking? In the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus calls for peacemakers, He is calling to people to action. All right? This is an active word. Jesus was not talking about what we often think about as peace, like this inner peace that we all seek, right? We want to be at peace no matter the circumstances around us. That is a very biblical concept. That is not what Jesus is talking about. When He calls us to peacemakers, or to be peacemakers, He is saying that you need to seek to bring peace to the people around you. Peacemaking is a commitment made by people to work things out, to come together. Peacemaking, the whole idea is to turn opponents into companions. Does that make sense? Okay. Wouldn't all of us want that? Don't you think most of us deep down would love a peaceful society where it's not us versus them, but we're companions, we're in this together? However, I think there's some obstacles even for believers that gets in the way of us truly desiring to be peacemakers. One of those obstacles is the misconception that peacemaking means compromising your convictions. Y'all follow me? That is one of the arguments. Like, I stand firm on this, right? This is what I believe. I will not bend, I will not break. And a peacemaker bends and breaks and goes all over the place. Peacemaking isn't about throwing away your convictions. Peacemaking keeps you from allowing those convictions to turn other people into enemies. It keeps you from looking at others with hatred and anger. If your convictions causes you to look at other people as the enemy, or as people less than, or as someone that God does not care about, throw away those convictions, because they are not good, they are not healthy, and they are not rooted in God. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to be in agreement with everyone. But being in agreement or being in disagreement and looking at somebody as an enemy are completely different. In fact, the scriptures tell us that we do not war against flesh and blood. God is saying our enemies are not one another. We're all created in the image of God. We are children of God. Now, some of us have been, all of us to an extent, have been corrupted, and we are all broken, but some of us have bought more into and been more converted into the evils of whatever than others. But that doesn't make us enemies. Evil is the enemy. Sin is the enemy, not us, and not the people outside of this building. So if we want to profess to be peacemakers, it's not about throwing away convictions. It's about throwing away convictions that make enemies of each other. Here's what one author, Ed Sturzer, writes. You can't hate people and engage them with the gospel. You can't war with people and show the love of Jesus. Hate never leads to peacemaking. Just can't. But don't think for 1 minute that peacemaking is simply not hating people. This is a very frustrating thing because we use this a lot and we justify a lot of our anger and hatred and lack of desire to bring peace by saying, I can love you but not like you. Or I can love you but from a distance. We don't have to be around each other. Now, don't misunderstand me. There are certain people that are poisonous and you have to be careful. I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking about a lack of desire to find peace because you really don't like that person. Peacemaking is about loving and building up everyone around you. That's what the Roman writer says. Romans 14:19. Let us therefore make every effort to do what leads to what? How do we lead to peace? It's the mutual edification of each other, right? Let us therefore make every effort to do what leads to peace and to mutual edification. You know why most people seek peace? For themselves, not for the other person. We are trying to build up each other. It's mutual edification. Peacemaking is a work intended on building up everyone involved, mending problems, uniting people together. The perfect example of this, Tony actually already shared with us. In Colossians 1:19 through 20, we read, For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him. Who's him? Jesus. And through Jesus to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood, through the blood of Jesus on the cross. What did God do? He took those of us who rejected him, those of us who have made ourselves enemies to God, and offered reconciliation back to him through Jesus. The separation that we brought, God determined to fix it. God brought peace for us through Jesus and the cross. And if peace is something God offers us, then we must seek to embody it and give it to others. Correct? I need more nodding of heads. Even if you disagree with me, at least let me know I've lost you somewhere. Because we're talking about a very difficult thing that is not even practiced very well in the church. The church might be one of the places we see it the least, and we should see it the most. So, how is God going to transform us from enemies to peacemakers? From people who sow discord and disunity to people who seek to be united even in differences. We're going to look at the passage that Lynn read for us this morning. And we're going to dissect it a little bit, because I think within James 3, verses 13 through 18, we find how we become peacemakers. So let's read it again together. It begins with a question. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom, he's explaining what the truth of people who believe that is. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But here's the answer. Here's the solution. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Now, in the young adult class, we're talking about misunderstood passages, and last week we talked about how to read the Bible, and one of the problems we often do is we take a small verse or small passage and we just try to interpret it without everything that surrounds it. It's one of the problems with reading James is we do that a lot. Because a lot of people think James is just a collection of really good moral teachings that have no connection with one another. It's like, he says this positive thing. He says, beware of this. Here's great moral life lessons. But the truth is, when we look at the letter of James like that, we miss the unity that's in that letter. We miss the connection. Chapter 3 is a perfect example. Because chapter 3, there's one major thought that's going on. If you skim the beginning of chapter 3, he talks about kind of improper teaching, false teaching. He's warning against the dangers that comes with teaching. And he starts to compare teachers and what we say to a tongue and to fire and to the dangers of the tongue. There seems to be a problem going on with James's audience. And it was a major problem for almost every church and every group of believers that got together. False teachers like to come in. And they like to say things that got people away from Jesus or convince people to do things that they didn't need to be convinced to do. So a big part of this letter and a big part of chapter 3 is a warning against false teachers and kind of a promise and a teaching on how we make sure we stay within the teachings of God. He begins it all by asking a question. Who is wise and understanding among you? So he's talked about this kind of danger of teaching and the tongues, and he goes, who's wise and understanding among you? I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you what is lack of wisdom, and I'm going to tell you what is wisdom. I'm going to tell you how you can determine what is wisdom from God and wisdom from false teachers. So he begins by talking about wisdom of false teachers, so that's where we're going to begin. James says that the wisdom of these false teachers is three things that sound worse and worse if you go on. Earthly, unspiritual, demonic. All right? We know those sound bad, but what makes it bad? All right, for the earthly part, this term carries with it the idea of impure or inferior. We're talking about a wisdom that is inferior to God's, a wisdom that is impure because it's not from God. But then it goes even deeper and says it's also unspiritual, opposite of spiritual, right? It's a wisdom that promotes a continued life in our fallen state. We know that we have the opportunity to live in communion with God and live as God created us to. And unspiritual wisdom says, keep doing life like you did without God. Right? Does that make sense? And then look at demonic. Demonic is the wisdom that looks to confound and confuse. It's intentionally deceptive. Go back to Genesis 3. When Satan comes to tempt Eve, right? He is deceiving her with the wisdom that makes sense, that is both earthly and unspiritual, intentionally trying to deceive, saying, you will not die, you will surely become like God. That sounds great. But the problem is, it's a lie. So what does an inferior, deceptive wisdom intent on deceiving us produce? It says bitter envy and selfish ambitions in the heart. And James says those types of things will create disorder and lead to every evil practice. So what is James saying? He's saying if you look to this world for an earthly, unspiritual, demonic wisdom, there will be discord and disunity and every other evil thing you can think about. I don't know if I want to go there yet. Sorry, I had a thought. I know, nope, we're not going to go there yet. But James mentions an alternative. He mentions a wisdom that comes from above. James had already said in chapter 1, verse 17, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights. As believers in God, we look to God for everything, including wisdom. We cannot seek earthly wisdom because it is void of the God that gives us every good and perfect thing. So we have to look to God to determine what is wise, how should we live, and all of these things. And the first thing we learn about wisdom from above is that it is pure. This is James contradicting or showing the contrast to earthly wisdom. If earthly wisdom is impure and inferior, then a wisdom from God is pure because God is holy and without guile. Like God is perfect. Anything outside of that is a charade of wisdom. It just isn't going to measure up, no matter what. So your wisdom has to come from someplace pure and superior to any other wisdom. That comes from God. And the very first thing that a pure, holy wisdom loves is what? Well, yes, but peace in this passage. It calls out and it says, first it is pure and then it is peace-loving. If earthly wisdom leads to discord and disunity, it would only make sense that a wisdom that comes from above leads to the opposite, which is unity and peace and togetherness. Those who seek to understand the pure wisdom of God will learn to practice the things that bring about peace and unity. And listen to everything else James says. He says, a pure wisdom of God that loves peace. Notice what else it promotes. It is considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Now, a lot of those words we already understand. I want to bring up two that might cause our ears to perk up a little bit. The first is submissive. When we read submissive, once again, our brains, if we're not careful, go to the compromising convictions thing, right? Okay? That's not what this is talking about. It's a sober-minded thinker, one who recognizes truth and is willing to receive and submit to it. It's a gentle, reasonable person. It is a person, when you have a conversation, they have not already determined this is what's right, and I'm going to convince you you're wrong. Now, they may not change because you may be wrong. But it is a person humble enough to seek truth. And when they find it, they submit their life to it. Does that make sense? Like, when you discover something that can help you, you have two reactions. Great, I'm going to keep doing my thing. Or you can be a submissive person and say, oh, this is great. I will now make the changes to submit and put this into practice, right? That's what James is talking about here. It's someone who finds the truth of God and that submits their life to it. And then that's what matters, and that's what shapes everything. And then you read impartial. I don't know where your brain went when you heard impartial, but it's not talking about someone who doesn't care one way or the other. It's talking about someone who has put their complete confidence and trust in God and God alone. All right? It means I'm not going either way. I am with God. God is the definer of wisdom and truth and life and everything else. There's a word that James uses a lot throughout his letter, and it's double-minded. This is the opposite of double-minded. A double-minded person, oh, that sounds good, that sounds good. An example is when Paul is in Athens, and he speaks to the Areopagus, and it says that the Areopagus loved to hear new thoughts because they just, oh, this is a great idea, let's adopt that. That's a great idea, let's adopt that. They were just, whatever was going on, they would debate it and think about it, but could be easily persuaded if it sounded really good. James is saying an impartial person has put their confidence in God. And unless something else falls into line with God, God gets priority. Does that make sense to everybody? So, an impartial person, we're not talking about a stubborn person. It's a humble follower of God. There are too many stubborn followers of God, where we've already determined this is right, this is wrong, and I don't need any more guidance from anybody else. I mean, put yourself in the shoes of the apostles. They never figured anything out. They were always wrong. And they were sincere followers. But boy, Jesus humbled them throughout his ministry. And then when Jesus is gone, now they find the confidence to put all their trust in what Jesus had said and taught them. But they had a lot of learning to do. And they still messed up. I mean, we see Paul and Peter having problems. We see Barnabas and Mark and Paul and all them having problems. They weren't perfect, but they were being guided by a God that they trusted and loved. The traits that James is talking about are so different than what earthly, unspiritual, demonic wisdom produces. I don't want a world, and I don't want a church that's filled with envy, that's filled with selfish ambitions. I don't want people who have to have it their way. I don't want people who are upset when somebody else seems to be somewhere they want to be. I want people who are considerate. I want to be considerate. I want to be full of mercy. I want to be sincere in my faith and love to people. What seems to be at the heart of everything James is writing about is godly wisdom brings about a peaceful society, a peaceful church. I'm sweating. I'm assuming that's why James closes this part by saying, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. This comment functions like a proverb. Y'all know what a proverb is, right? Just a wise saying. And James seems to be using this proverb to drive home the point of everything he's been talking about. Understanding that wisdom that comes from above leads to a people who seek to bring and make peace. The righteousness of God comes pouring out of peacemakers. That's why they're called children of God. In a world where peace is so hard to find, we have to look above and practice the wisdom that comes from God. Every other wisdom is going to be a problem. Let's go back to the question James asked in verse 13 that started the conversation. Who is wise and understanding among you? This may seem like a simple question. You know, they're actually echoing the words of a former proverb. Proverbs 3:13 we read, "Blessed are those who find wisdom, those who gain understanding." One of the things we don't do well, we don't read the Old Testament enough. The writers of the New Testament, they knew the Old Testament. James knew the Proverbs. There's no doubt the way this is worded is not unintentional. James's question is more than a question. It's a reminder. He reminds them of a long-standing truth. People are happier when they have wisdom and understanding. But the only wisdom that's worth seeking is the one that comes from God. The only one we should try to understand is God, because God will lead us to better understand each other, better understand ourselves, better live out his truth. James's audience, as well as us today, need to seek the wisdom of God. People in this world, and ourselves included, we're being fed a wisdom that is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. And because of that, people are self-seeking. I didn't say those people are self-seeking. I said people are self-seeking. We seek what's best for ourselves first. And that happens in the church as well. Self-seeking mindset has produced within people a hatred for others. There's a reason there's not just division in the world, but division in the family of God. It's because we're self-seeking. And when we're self-seeking, we don't get our way. What do? We hate the people that get their way. We look at them as enemies that must be destroyed. And that has created discord, and it has caused people to tear one another apart. When we're surrounded by people whose whole objective is to destroy another person, when a conversation is all about how evil another person is, how bad another person is, that's not peacemaking. That is a earthly, unspiritual, demonic wisdom. We're not about destroying. We're about bringing peace. The world needs this. The world needs people who are seeking pure wisdom from God, a wisdom that looks to bring people into the arms of God, a wisdom that looks to unite people, no matter their differences, into the family of God, a wisdom that seeks peace, is considerate, submissive to God, merciful to others, filled with good works, fully committed to God, and sincere in their love for both God and each other. The world needs the children of God to offer something different from the winning culture that dominates. I said I didn't want to share that one thing yet. I'll share it now. This Tuesday, we know what this Tuesday is, right? Yeah, it's day after Monday. Anything else? This Tuesday, this country elects a new leader. For some, whatever the result, for some it will feel like the ultimate victory, and for others, a torturous defeat. But what about for the Christian? Where do we find our wisdom? Where do we put our trust? Where is our hope? Let us remember that no matter the results, our God rules. And because of this, don't just be content. I'm going to ask us to do something else. Let us, as children of God, make the decision to bring peace to the people who, after Tuesday, become even more divided. Bring peace to people who feel completely broken and hopeless. Bring peace to people who are angry, both at God and others. Let us do everything we can do to bring peace and harmony to people we call brothers and sisters. That Tuesday will not work out the way they want to, or will be overconfident that Tuesday really worked out the way they wanted it to. I heard you say the lamb. You know, not a party of the donkey, not a party of the elephant, party of the lamb, right? Yeah. I love that concept. We don't live that concept. To truly believe that we belong to Jesus and Jesus alone will change how we look at so many things. But what we need to do is to make sure the peace that we have found in God, we offer to others. One of the ways we'll do that is we practice these virtues we've read in James 3. These virtues are divine. These virtues will bring peace. These virtues will help others come to see and know God. So as we conclude, let's not be divided, but united. Let us decide not to make war against people on the other side, but to make companions, to make friends, to make brothers and sisters. Let us decide to be peacemakers united under the name of God, peacemakers who call themselves children of God. I'm done, all right? I don't know how to give an invitation to this. And I say that because I'm guessing almost all of us, when we're talking about peacemakers, we're talking to somebody else. During this whole lesson, you're like, and maybe not. Maybe you're a holy, humble person. But most of us were like, I really hope heard this. I needed this study. I'm not a peacemaker. I think I am until the rubber meets the road. And I have strong convictions. And I told somebody, I wouldn't mention the situation, but I said, I'm going to confess during this sermon that recently I got into a dumb political conversation that I didn't even care much about and almost made an enemy of a friend. And I'm like, what's wrong with me? Like, I wasn't seeking peace. I was trying to convince them they were wrong and I was right. So this lesson isn't for y'all, it's for me. So this is me responding to God's invitation. I need to be better at making peace. I need to be better not just at wanting you to make peace with me, but me humbly making peace with you. Because that's what God's done for me. When God sent his son, he said, you're never going to be able to make this up. You're never going to be able to make things right. You don't even really want to, but I do. And I'm going to bring peace to us through my son. So there is no way in this world that I need to bring discord to us when I have been brought into a relationship with God because of his love and his peace. So that's the invitation. And if we can help in any way, come as we stand and sing.